Christianity has always had to wrestle with verses in their Bible, whereas God inflicts gruesome acts of violence on children. It is difficult to reconcile a loving God who says, "Let the children come to me," who at the same time is a vicious baby killer. In this video, we will examine such evils perpetrated against innocent children. When we open up our Bibles, one of the most popular stories we will come across is where God passes through the entire nation of Egypt, murdering innocent children for the sole purpose of making a PowerPoint. The most disturbing aspect of this story is how the Pharaoh wanted to comply and do as God asked, but God hardened the Pharaoh's heart in order to display his great power by means of baby killing on a scale that would make Hitler look like a saint. Later in the book of Psalms, the author praises God for this disgusting display of power, and it gets worse from there, much worse. In 2 Kings we read, "As Elijah was going up, there came forth little children and mocked him, saying, 'Go up, thou bald head.' And he turned back and looked on them, and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the woods, and dismembered 42 of the boys." This is not a freak accident. This is God's way of making another PowerPoint. Don't ever tease a prophet of God. God proves many times over to have a disturbing lack of empathy for children. In the book of Numbers, we read about Moses and his gruesome war against the Midians. Moses tells his men that God has commanded them to kill every man, woman, and child. Moses' warriors slaughtered only the men and defiantly kept for themselves the children and females. Moses, God's mouthpiece, was very upset about this, so he commanded every woman and child to be killed, except for the young female virgins. The young virgins they could keep, while the other children, mothers, and toddlers were executed in God's camp that day. In the book of Samuel, again, God directly commands the slaughter of the Amalekite babies. Kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child. Most of us cannot fathom such violence performed on babies. It is too evil and gruesome for us to even try imagining it. In the book of Jeremiah, God punishes a people known as the Anathoths by deliberately starving their children to death. Death by starvation is a very dark and sinister way of killing off children. In the Battle of Jericho, again, the Hebrews are ordered to kill all children, but this time God commands them to keep all of the jewels, linens, and gold for his treasury. Clearly, this God values gold more than the life of a human child. In the book of Psalms, the author expresses his feelings of revenge against the Babylonians when he writes, "Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones." This brutal and disgusting imagery for murdering innocent babies is never okay or happy. No book on this planet, if claiming to be holy, should contain any such insinuations, but it gets even worse. God promises to destroy the infants of Samaria and rip open the stomachs of pregnant women. They shall fall by the sword. Their little ones will be dashed to the ground, their pregnant women ripped open. In a town called Tipsah, because they refused to open their gates, Menahem, king of Israel, known as the Comforter, sacked them and ripped open all the pregnant women. In the book of Isaiah, God brags about what he will do to women and children. They shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes shall not spare children. Their children also shall be dashed to pieces before their eyes, and their wives ravished. Essentially, God is boasting how he will rape the women and slaughter the children in front of the men, the husbands and the fathers. This is absolute definition of disgusting evil, if ever there could be one. In the book of Hosea, the prophet prays for God's intervention to give his own people a miscarrying womb. Ephraim shall bring forth his children to the murderer. The murderer here is God. Give them a miscarrying womb. And of course, God obeys by saying, "Even though they give birth, I will kill the cherished offspring of their womb." Yes, God is an abortionist, a self-professed fetus and baby killer. In the book of Lamentations, God gets so angry that he torments and kills both child and old people. He even creates a severe famine and crazes the people so that women are eating their own children. In the book of Judges, a man of God, Jephthah, kills his younger daughter, his only child, as a burnt sacrifice because of a promise he made to God. God had no intent to admonish or stop him from performing this human sacrifice made to himself. Even when God decides to spare children from the sword, it seems they still hold little value. God continues with ill intent, even when he offers a pass to live. And when the Lord your God delivers it into your hands, ye shall strike every male in it with the edge of the sword, but the women, the little ones, and all that is in the city, all is spoil. You shall plunder for yourself. God is saying as clearly as possible that women and children are to be nothing more than objects to be owned and plundered. So how do Christians attempt to reconcile such gruesome evil with a loving God? I have heard three common apologetics. One is to say that these other people were not human. They had the genetics of a group of people known as giants, or the Nephilim. In other words, they weren't children. They were all little monsters from another world, and God was simply ridding the earth of a bad gene pool. However, if you recall, they were allowed to keep the young female virgins who would have carried these inhumane genes, rendering the apologetic a complete fail. It has also been argued that the children had to be killed in order to keep the religious traditions of their fathers from being continued. This argument also fails due to the leniency of allowing young virgins to live and/or young boys to become slaves. Neither do these two apologetics account for all of the acts of unnecessary violence on children. The third apology is that because God can give life, he can take it. The argument is simple. He is God, and God is really doing these children a favor because they will bypass judgment. You see, Christians work out the death of children in a very odd way. If you die as a child, you get a free pass into God's glorious heaven. For Christians, it seems as though a long life may prove detrimental to one's salvation. In Christian theology, it is better to die as a child. That is how perverted this theology can become when they try to offer reason for madness. Put quite simply, Most Christians wish to avoid this discussion. It is disturbing how anybody would have to build a defense for such gruesome acts of evil, or attempt to justify cruelty towards a child for their God, or find themselves defending acts of cruelty against women and children because it is in their holy books. They have no choice but to do so. I, however, do not believe the Bible is a revelation from God. Therefore, it is not a defense I would ever pick up. In my mind, killing or abusing innocent children is always wrong. If it were to be true that God drowned all of the world's children in a violent flood, it would prove only one thing to me. He is an evil God. He could very easily have snapped his fingers and made them vanish peacefully. This God favors violence and has a lust for blood. We will examine this bloodlust in part 3 of this series. The famous entertainer Stephen Allen wraps it up well when he said, "It was only when I finally undertook to read the Bible through beginning to end that I perceived its depiction of the Lord God, whom I had always viewed as the very embodiment of perfection, was actually that of a monstrous, vengeful tyrant, far exceeding in bloodthirstiness and insane savagery the depredations of Hitler, Stalin, Attila the Hun, or any other mass murderer of ancient or modern history." In part 2 of this Evil God trilogy, we will examine God's cruelty towards women. Until then, stay strong and wise, my friends.
I don't believe in masquerades. I don't believe that you're okay. I don't believe that God will save. Only you can solve your problems. I don't care what they sold you. They are not here to hold you. Don't